Every road eventually reaches a point where civilization begins to fade. Not because the journey ends, but because the wilderness begins. Beyond this point, there are no villages, no landmarks, no stories. Only untouched land waiting for its first. And sometimes, before you can build a place, first have to build the world around it. Hello, welcome to Sugoi Micro Series, episode 17, where the wild begins. This is where Greenhollow will eventually be, and for a long time I knew there needed to be something between here and the Heartlands. Not another village, but the landscape that made the journey feel like you're actually leaving one region behind before arriving in another. That's why I wanted to build this forest. It creates a natural transition between the towns. You leave the towns and the roads of the Heartlands behind, travel through the wilderness, and eventually emerge here. So by the time you finally reach Greenhollow, it doesn't feel like another village. It feels like the beginning of a different part of the world. I spent quite a while just walking around, trying to understand what this place wanted to become, and eventually an idea started coming together. I wanted the journey itself to slowly change, leaving Stonebridge. The lake would always be there on your left, visible through the trees, reminding you that the Heartlands aren't all that far behind, but the further you travel, the denser the forest will become. The views get shorter, the road grows quieter, and before you even realize it, you're surrounded by wilderness. So by the time Greenhollow finally appears, it feels like you've actually traveled somewhere. Of course, none of that happens without gathering a ridiculous amount of materials first. I always underestimate just how many leaves, ferns, and other blocks a forest actually needs. Every project begins the same way. One block, one tree, one small decision. And on their own, they don't seem like much, but over time, those small decisions begin shaping an entire landscape. So I'll stop talking and I'll let you enjoy this small montage. After having gathered all the materials I needed, I could finally start building. Even though the road doesn't run directly beside the lake, it felt like this whole area needed my attention, because it wasn't just a road anymore, it was an entire region that will eventually connect the Heartlands to the wildlands beyond. And that included the shoreline, so I started with the lake itself, shaping the rocky coast and trying to give it the feeling of a real place rather than just the edge of a biome. The shoreline is heavily inspired by the Swedish coast, flat stretches of stone, patches of grass growing between them, and calm water meeting the rocks. It's a very simple kind of landscape, but I think that's exactly what makes it so beautiful. From there, I slowly started working my way inland. The goal was never to hide the lake completely, I wanted it to stay present in the background as you travel south. So the first section of the forest stays fairly open, letting you keep sight of the water. But the further you move away from Stonebridge, the more the trees begin to close in. At first, the lake is always there on your left. Then it starts appearing only through gaps in the forest, through carefully placed coastal oaks sitting right along the edge. And eventually, the wilderness becomes the thing you notice. And this was honestly the part I was most excited for, watching the trees slowly begin to swallow the landscape. Every time I'd move a little further down the road, there seemed to be a little less open space behind me, and a little more wilderness ahead. The plains that had been here at the start of the project were gradually disappearing beneath the canopy, and even though I already knew what the finished forest would look like, there was still something incredibly satisfying watching it take shape here in survival. With every section that was completed, the road felt a little more enclosed, the views became shorter, and the atmosphere started changing. What had started as a wide open landscape was slowly becoming wilderness. And somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like I was building a forest and more like a feeling I was traveling through one. Let's take a short break from building. I know I touched on this a little in the last episode, but I think it's becoming one of the most important parts of this world. When I first started building in this world, I mostly focused on the destinations, the villages, the castles, the landmarks, and while those will probably always be the heart of the world, I started realizing something. It's often the journey between those places that makes you remember them. If every destination is only a minute apart, they never really feel separate. But if you leave one region, travel through another, and slowly watch the landscape change around you, the world suddenly starts feeling much larger. And I think that's exactly what this forest does. The world isn't measured by its size, it's measured by the feeling of discovering it. After taking a step back, I realized the forest was still missing some major details. The trees were there, the shoreline was there, and the overall shape of the region was finally starting to come together. But when I walked through it, it still felt a little too clean. The ground didn't really match the atmosphere of the forest yet. So the next step wasn't about adding more trees, it was about adding the smaller details. Ferns beneath the canopy, patches of flowers catching the light, small clusters of rocks, and all the little things that stop the landscape from feeling too uniform. And if you ever built a big forest in Minecraft, you probably know exactly what I mean. Individually, none of these details are very exciting. A single fern doesn't change much, a few flowers doesn't suddenly make the build amazing, but once you start laying hundreds of those small details together, the whole atmosphere changes. The forest stops feeling like a collection of trees and starts feeling like a place you could actually wander through for a while. That was probably one of my favorite moments of the entire project. Not because it was finished yet, but because it was the first time I could really see the final vision coming together. Up until that point, it had been individual sections. The shoreline, the trees, the road, the details. Walking through it and seeing the lake disappear behind the forest, seeing the road weave through the canopy, and feeling the atmosphere finally match the idea I had in my head. That was the moment everything finally clicked for me. What had started as an empty plain south of Stonebridge was finally beginning to feel like a real stretch of wilderness separating the Heartlands from whatever lies further south. And for the first time, I could actually walk through the region the way I had imagined it from the beginning. One of the first things you notice when leaving the Heartlands is this river crossing right before the forest begins. I ended up spending a surprising amount of time on small details here. The sausage plants along the banks, the sugarcane and azalea used for algae right at the water's edge, and the way the river slowly bends into the surrounding landscape. Then the road starts pulling into the forest itself, and this was probably the trickiest part of the whole forest. I wanted the shoreline to stay visible on the left while walking through the trees. That meant placing the canopy very intentionally, so the forest could feel dense without completely hiding the lake. And every now and then, if you look to the left, you still catch a glimpse of the stone shore through the gaps in the trees. That ended up becoming one of my favorite parts of the whole layout. And the further you go, the more of your attention shifts from the horizon to the road itself. The curves through the trees, the light breaking through the canopy, and all the little details along the forest floor. That's the feeling I was hoping this region would create. Not a dramatic reveal, just a quiet realization that you travel far enough for the landscape itself to feel different. And honestly, that was the moment I became most excited for Greenhollow. Because if the journey already feels this different before the village even exists, then arriving there is going to feel like reaching an entirely new part of the world. I've built forests before in this world, but this is the first time the forest wasn't just supporting another build, it was the build. And honestly, I wasn't sure if it would even make for an interesting project, but somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about the individual builds and started thinking about regions, not just villages, but the landscapes they belong to. Because when every place has its own character, traveling between them becomes part of the experience. And I think that's what I'm enjoying most about building in this world right now. And eventually this road is going to lead into Greenhollow, Right now though, this is where the finished part of the forest ends. Greenhollow itself still isn't built yet, and the farming region beyond this bridge is only scribbled out at the moment. But honestly, I think that's part of what makes this area exciting. For me, the goal of this episode wasn't reaching the destination, it was finally creating a wilderness that separates the Heartlands from the regions further south. Now, when you leave Stonebridge, you don't immediately arrive at another settlement. You actually have to travel through a different landscape first. I think that makes Greenhollow feel much more meaningful, because when we finally begin building it, it won't feel like a village placed a few hundred blocks away. It'll feel like a place you've genuinely journeyed to. And Greenhollow isn't really the end of the road either. Beyond its farming region and its town, the route continues toward Creaky Lake and further still the Memorial Mountains. That's a part of the world I want to develop slowly over many different episodes. So even though this episode was mostly about the shoreline and the forest, it's actually laying the foundation for everything that comes after it. I think this is a good place to leave it for today. It's honestly kind of crazy how different this area feels now, considering it started as nothing more than an empty plain. And I think this episode reminded me that sometimes the landscape itself can be just as important as the villages we build within it. So the next major chapter of this journey will take us to Greenhollow. I have a feeling this is going to become one of my favorite regions in my world. One last thing before I go. We recently hit 50 subscribers. It's funny, because this world has slowly grown over the last few months, and so has this little community around it. So whether you've been here since the beginning or just found the series recently, thank you for watching, for leaving comments, and for following the journey through Sequoias. It really does mean a lot to me. Anyways, that will have to do it for today. So, as always, I wish you all the best and see you soon.